Welcome back to Major Intonio's presentation of The Life of the Emperor Francis Joseph by Francis Gribble. Chapter 29.
Francis Ferdinand is the son of Francis Joseph's brother, Charles Louis, and himself the brother of the Archduke Otto, whose outrageous eccentricities we have reviewed, and of the Archduke Frederick Charles, who wooed and won the homely daughter of the mathematical master after helping her to shell the peas. He was not classed in his youth with the archdukes who matter, for he was a delicate boy and it seemed unlikely that he would live to grow up. Though he grew up, he remained delicate, and it was still assumed that he would die young. Hence the talk, which came to nothing, of marrying the Archduchess Elisabeth to Prince Eitel Fritz, and securing the succession to the throne to her by a fresh, pragmatic sanction. Whether we regard him as having been well or badly brought up depends upon our educational ideals. If it be good to be a Catholic, and better still to be a bigoted Catholic, then his upbringing was admirable. From his earliest years, he was taught to walk, if not with God, at least with the Jesuits, the worthy son of a father of limited intelligence, who combined, if his portraits are to be trusted, the smug appearance of a sinister family solicitor with the fanaticism of an ultramontane reactionary. There are those, to this day, who sum him up with the statement that he is in the hands of the Jesuits. But that is a phrase which may, in practice, mean anything or nothing. When princes and priests form a holy alliance, the wisdom of the serpent is quite as likely to be found in one partner of the combination as in the other. Their interests are seldom identical, and exploitation is a game at which two can play. It mattered little as long as Francis Ferdinand was expected to die at any instant of consumption, but he did not die of that disease, and perhaps he never really had it. He wintered in warm climates, he took cod liver oil, he traveled. Treatment and medicine produced the desired effect. Francis Ferdinand became as well able as any of his relatives to take his place in public life and had to be reckoned with. The question of finding a wife for him became urgent. There were plenty of archduchesses available. Why did he not choose one of them and beget an heir? That was what Francis Joseph wanted to know when he saw his nephew 35 or more, and still a bachelor. The resulting dialogues are said to have been rather heated. Presently, rumor began to whisper that Francis Joseph had got his way. It was observed that Francis Ferdinand paid frequent visits to the house of the Archduke Frederick and the Archduchess Isabella at Pressburg. They had charming daughters. The Archduchess Gabrielle was particularly charming. Here, it was felt, well within the Habsburg ring fence, was the opportunity of an ideal betrothal, and here, at any rate, was the journalist's opportunity for the intelligent anticipation of events before they occurred. Various newspapers, though not the official ones, grasped that opportunity and announced the betrothal. Official confirmation, they did not doubt, would come later, enabling them to boast, "I told you so." But those readers of the newspapers who had been admitted to the Archduchess Isabella's family circle shook their heads. They had seen what they had seen, and they anticipated quite other eventualities. The Archduchess Isabella had a lady-in-waiting, Countess Sophie Chotek, a member of a Bohemian family, which, though old, was poor, and not of the highest order of nobility. Her father had held a governorship in Bohemia. Her brother was a provincial official of moderate, but not excessive, dignity. But Francis Ferdinand, while charmingly polite to the Archduchess Gabrielle, was more often to be seen sitting in cozy corners with Countess Sophie Chotek. Often and often, he sat a whole evening with her in a cozy corner, talking gloomily about his health and complaining of the rigorous prescriptions of the doctors. Cod liver oil, he said, was horrid stuff. It did him no good. He should stop taking it. And Countess Sophie Chotek reasoned and pleaded with him, as womanly women do. Of course, cod liver oil was good for him. He mustn't be silly and pretend that he knew better than the doctors. A peppermint lozenge would take away the taste. Anyhow, take it he really must, not only for his own sake, but for the sake of those to whom his life was precious. "For my sake, to please me," she concluded coaxingly, and Francis Ferdinand promised, and found that the medicine did work the promised miracle. He got better and better until he was quite well, and there was joy in the House of Habsburg, and all the archdukes and archduchesses were grateful to Countess Sophie Chotek. It delighted the Archduchess Isabella in particular to see that her lady-in-waiting had such a good influence over the heir apparent, and had succeeded, after everyone else had failed, in modifying his attitude towards his medicine. It did not occur to her that cod liver oil was a potion which could operate as a love filter, or that the conversations conducted in the cozy corners might have run on from cod liver oil to other and more intimate themes. But so it was. And while the Archduchess Isabella was giving Countess Sophie Chotek great credit for her tact, Countess Sophie Chotek was in truth displaying even more tact than the Archduchess was giving her credit for. For it came to this, that while the Archduke Francis Ferdinand was supposed to be nursing himself with a view to proposing marriage to the Archduchess's daughter, he was, in fact, offering the devotion of a lifetime to the Archduchess's lady-in-waiting. He was not only taking his oil 3 times a day for her sake, he was also declaring that, if it cured him, he should feel that he owed his life to her, and should show his gratitude by begging her to unite her life to his. It was understood between them that, when he did ask her to do this, she would not refuse. But meanwhile they kept their counsel until an accident disclosed their secret. That secret came to light because Francis Ferdinand, or perhaps his valet, was a careless packer. He had been at Halbthurn on a visit to the Archduke Frederick, and when he had taken his departure, a servant came to the Archduchess Isabella and told her that he had left a quantity of jewelry behind him on the dressing table. It had, of course, to be sent after him, and the Archduchess thought it better to see to the matter herself. She went to the bedroom, therefore, to collect and review the jewelry, and the inspection gave her a shock. She spoke to a servant. "Tell Countess Chotek I desire to see her immediately." Countess Sophie Chotek obeyed her summons and was greeted with, "This calls for an explanation, miss. Pray, what have you to say for yourself?" This, being a medallion portrait of the Countess discovered among Francis Ferdinand's personal effects. One can imagine that the blow was a severe one to an imperial mother who had cherished the hope of marrying her imperial daughter to the heir apparent. One can further easily believe that the explanation, if any, which was offered, was unacceptable. One can almost fancy that one hears the climax of the dialogue. "That will do. You need say nothing more, but you will leave my house at once. I give you half an hour in which to pack." Of course, Countess Sophie could not pack in half an hour, but had to go without her luggage. Of course, too, the discovery of a portion of her secret entailed the revelation of the whole of it, though so far as the public were concerned, it was only made known by degrees. First came the report that Francis Joseph and Francis Ferdinand were, for some unknown reason, not on speaking terms, and that the court officials were snubbing Francis Ferdinand with educated insolence. Then came the rumor that Francis Ferdinand was going to renounce his archducal rights, marry Countess Sophie Chotek, leave Austria, and take up his residence with her at the Villa d'Este at Rome. Finally came the official notification that the marriage would take place, that the emperor had sanctioned it, but on terms. And the nature of those terms? This is not a court history, and there is no need to gloss them over. They shall be described with absolute frankness and in plain language. The stipulation which the prestige of the House of Habsburg was held to require was this, that affronts should be publicly put on the bride before, during, and after the ceremony. The view officially taken of her may be said to be summed up in the carefully worded speech which the emperor, gorgeously attired in his field marshal's uniform, read at a special meeting of his privy council. Every phrase in it should be noted with care. Quote, "I have invited the members of my house, my privy councillors, and my ministers to attend today's ceremony, because the declaration which will be made is of the highest importance to the monarchy, inspired by the wish always to provide as best I can for the members of my high house, and to give my nephew a new proof of special love, I have consented to his marriage with Countess Sophie Chotek. The Countess descends, it is true, from noble lineage, but her family is not one of those which, according to the customs of our house, we regard as our equals. Now, as only women from equal houses can be regarded as equal in birth, This marriage must be regarded in the light of a morganatic marriage, and the children which, with God's blessing, will spring from it cannot be given the rights of members of the imperial house. The Archduke will, therefore, to make this certain for all time, today take an oath to the effect that he recognizes all this, that he recognizes his marriage with Countess Chotek to be a morganatic one, that the consequences are that the marriage cannot be regarded as one between equals, and that the children springing from it can never be regarded as rightful children, entitled to the rights of members of our house. I beg the minister of my imperial house to read the oath which the Archduke will swear." Unquote. The emperor's voice is said to have been full of emotion while he recited this solemn manifesto. One would like to attribute at least a little of the emotion to regret that his family pride required him to insult a woman who, far from doing him any harm, had saved his nephew's life by coaxing him to obey his physicians. But it is difficult to picture Francis Joseph as melted to tenderness by the idyll of the cod liver oil. In any case, his emotion, whatever it may have been, was not allowed to interfere with the ceremony, which was continued with an ecclesiastical pomp, indicating that Francis Joseph does indeed, at times, mistake himself for God and the archdukes for archangels, who are failing to behave as such. It was Francis Ferdinand's turn. Bowing to the emperor, he advanced to the table, on which stood a crucifix, laid his first and middle fingers on the testament, which was held up to him by the Archbishop of Vienna, and read the oath from a paper which he held in his left hand. This is the remarkable text of it. "I, Francis Ferdinand, by the grace of God, Archduke of Austria, swear to God the Almighty that I recognize the house laws always, and in the case of my marriage with Sophie, Countess Chotek, specially. That I accept the oath read to me, with all its clauses, and therefore recognize that my marriage with Sophie Chotek is a morganatic one. That the children which, with God's blessing, may spring from this marriage will not be equal in birth, and according to the pragmatic sanction, will not be entitled to succeed to the throne, either in Austria or in Hungary." Unquote. The two speeches sound like the last lingering echoes of medievalism, and Francis Joseph, in spite of the successive shocks which experience has given him, probably retains more medieval ideas than any other contemporary ruler. The superiority of the Habsburgs to the rest of mankind, at all events of Austrian mankind, is not for him a proposition which needs to be demonstrated. It is a law of thought. He does not argue about it or expect others to argue about it, but finds it in his consciousness, together with his conceptions of space and time. What others may do counts for nothing in comparison with what the Habsburgs are, and that though a simple-minded seeker after truth who should ask what they are, could be told little in reply except that they are the Habsburgs. Gold, similarly, is esteemed a nobler metal than iron, though it cannot be fashioned into such effective swords or plowshares. On that principle, therefore, the principle that to be is more than to do, and that the function of those who can do is to serve those who are, Francis Joseph took his stand, thoroughly believing in it, himself at once the worshipper and the worshipped, no more regarding his declaration of his own immeasurable superiority to other men as an insult to those to whom he declared himself superior than the judge so regards his admonition of the convicted prisoner in the dock. One can only insult one's equals. Any day on which the head of the House of Habsburg decides a point of precedence takes rank as a judgment day, a day on which there can be only one answer to the question, shall not the judge of all the earth do right? It was a matter of course that the prelates of the state church lent themselves to the doctrine, for that is what the prelates of a state church are for. So that it was a matter of course that Francis Ferdinand should be required to proclaim urbi et orbi that he was marrying beneath him, that the marriage should be condemned to be a hole and corner affair which even the bridegroom's brothers did not attend, that the bride's status should be left so undignified that it was not permissible to her to attend the opera with her husband or to sit in the imperial stand with him at the races. But though that was Francis Joseph's official attitude as an emperor and a Habsburg, he was also a man and a brother, capable of tolerance and condescension, increasingly capable of it as the years went by. Flexibility, good nature, weariness of the long struggle with the zeitgeist. One does not know to which of these things to attribute the modification of his tone, but he has modified it. Francis Ferdinand has been taken back into favor and allowed to hold the highest offices suitable for him. And Countess Sophie Chotek has been promoted to be Duchess of Hohenberg. She does not yet rank with the archduchesses, but she does take her place in the hierarchy immediately after them. How will she rank eventually after the inevitable day on which Francis Joseph is gathered to his fathers? That is a question which must soon, in the course of nature, present itself, and it would be a great mistake to suppose that it was settled, once and for all, when Francis Ferdinand stood before the crucifix and swore that his wife was, and that his children would be, inferior persons, unworthy to be related to him. It is not merely that Jove laughs at lovers' perjuries, or that Francis Ferdinand's heart rejects the Habsburg superstition to which we have seen him rendering lip service. One must also remember that knots of this kind can never be tied so tightly that no way of untying them can be found by adroit and willing hands. No doubt the Archduke is a religious man who understands the nature of an oath, but he was brought up by the Jesuits, and one suspects that he has not been brought up by them for nothing. All Catholics are addicted to casuistry, and the Jesuits specialize in it, nor does one need any extraordinary shrewdness to divine the insidious questions which may be invoked as solvents of a situation which Francis Joseph believed himself to have made hard and fast. Let us set them forth in order. 1. Granted that Francis Ferdinand had the right to swear away his own rights, had he any right to swear away the potential rights of persons still unborn? 2. Granted that Francis Ferdinand is personally bound by his oath, on what grounds can that oath fetter the freedom of action of the Hungarian and Austrian parliaments? 3. Cannot the Pope, to whom God has given the power to loose and bind, free any man from any obligation, even though he has sworn by bell, book, and candle to bow to it? 4. Would it not be right and reasonable for the Pope to accord that dispensation to such a religious man as Francis Ferdinand? Would it not be to the interest of the Church that he should do so? 5. Is there any particular reason why the Austrian and Hungarian parliaments should not petition him to take that course? Upon the answers given to those questions, and not upon the text of the oath which Francis Ferdinand swore, the ultimate inheritance of the empire will depend. They are questions to which, so far as logic goes, one answer is as good as another, which means that the answer actually given to them will be dictated by expediency and the wishes of the influential. Those who picture Francis Ferdinand dutifully abiding by his pledges because he is a religious man not only misjudge him, but misjudge religious people generally. There is always a higher law. The universe is full of higher laws. One can always appeal to them, and if one is an emperor, one may have the advantage of being judge in one's own case. Francis Ferdinand will enjoy that advantage presently, and it remains to be seen what use he will make of it. The issue is not yet, though it cannot be long delayed. Meanwhile, one may salute Francis Ferdinand respectfully as one who has fought a good fight and has not been content with half successes. His wife is a clever woman who knows how to bide her time and does not go out of her way to make unnecessary enemies. He himself has his party, which looks likely to be the party of the future. The blow which he has struck at the Habsburg system is the hardest blow which that system has yet sustained, because he has struck it with dignity and self-restraint, gratifying the instinctive Habsburg craving for the infusion of fresh blood without provoking any of those scandals which give the enemy occasion to blaspheme. If the papacy was in earnest when it admonished the Habsburgs for their consanguineous unions, then he may fairly claim that the Pope is his ally in the battle. One cannot say the same of the acts of rebellion which have to be reviewed next, though they too have served their purpose as object lessons, crowning proofs to be cited in support of the thesis that the Habsburg system of inbreeding in order to develop a unique type of man and woman is a failure, and that nature, expelled with a pitchfork, is apt to return, an old friend with a new face, exaggerating even to the point of grotesqueness the normal man and woman's passion for romance.
Chapter 30.
The terrible year in the family annals of the House of Habsburg began towards the end of 1902. Before then, though many archdukes and archduchesses had caused trouble, they had raised the flag of rebellion independently, one at a time. Now we see a brother and a sister making a simultaneous and concerted demonstration. Princess Louisa of Tuscany embarking on the adventure which united her, for a season, and still legally unites her, to Signor Toselli, and the Archduke Leopold Ferdinand adopting the style of Herr Wolfling in order to be free to follow the promptings of an impulsive heart. Princess Louisa has told her own story. It is the story, of course, of a woman placed on her defense, replying to charges, making out a case for herself, and it therefore requires to be read critically. But the holes which criticism can pick in it do not affect the general verisimilitude of the picture. Most of the facts, after all, were too notorious to be disputed. All that was possible was a manifesto of motives, and Princess Louisa's exposition of these was entitled to an attentive and respectful hearing. She, at least, might be supposed to know why she did the things which the whole world knew her to have done. It may be, indeed, that she wrote some of her pages as one who desired to deceive, but that desire only related at the most to a few points of detail. The net impression of the narrative is one of winning candor. Princess Louisa could not, of course, criticize herself from a detached standpoint, but she explained herself. There seems, at the first blush, to be a certain confusion of thought in her explanations. One cannot always make out whether she is excusing her conduct on the ground that she is a Habsburg and therefore mad, or patting herself on the back for having followed the sane and sensible, as well as the romantic course. But it is also a little difficult to make out which of the two lines would have been the proper one for her to take. There is a point of view, it has already been expounded in these pages, from which her precipitate descent from dizzy heights of grandeur presents some of the aspects of Christian's flight from the city of destruction. But it must in justice be added that Princess Louisa, having been born in the city of destruction, and having spent her impressionable years in it, had herself acquired some of the characteristics of the inhabitants. The true picture, perhaps, is that of an abnormal character stimulated by a sane instinct to sudden, unexpected, and eccentric action. It was not on her father's side only that there was insanity in her house. Her mother was a Bourbon Parma, and about the Bourbons of Parma, Princess Louisa neither has nor affects to have any illusions. They are madder than the Habsburgs and have none of their redeeming qualities. The character sketches which Princess Louisa gives us of her maternal great-grandfather, Duke Charles of Parma, and Lucca, and of her uncle, Duke Robert of Parma, are sketches of lunatics, though the instinctive perception that the royal family party was a city of destruction from which it was imperative to escape for self-realization in the atmosphere of romance appears in her account of his relations with his duchess, who bored him to tears, quote, "She was devout and excessively plain, and whenever he returned from a visit to Parma, he was wont to exclaim, 'Il faut absolument que j'aille me retremper auprès d'une jolie femme après ce tombeau de mon illustre compagne.'" Unquote. Nor is that all, for Princess Louisa does not exhaust the subject. She might also have spoken of certain Parma cousins, 19 children of a single father. Some 16 of them are said to be, or to have been, of feeble intellect. One hears of one of them wandering about in the pathetic belief that she is Marie Antoinette, carrying an orange with her and insisting that it is her head which has recently been cut off. It is not difficult to picture Princess Louisa thinking her way to the conclusion that to be of royal birth was to come of tainted stock. She would be more likely to come to that conclusion if one may assume that the seeds of morbidity were latent in her, even when her youthful high spirits concealed them. It would not have mattered, or at any rate, it would have mattered less, if the truths of eugenics had been revealed to her in time, and she had fought, while still a girl, for the right to dispose of her heart as she chose. That is to say that a genuine romance at that age might have saved her from a great deal. But love did not come, and she was only a girl, and a sufficiently good girl to do as she was told, though not without a high-spirited girl's disposition to laugh at uncongenial suitors. She laughed at Ferdinand of Saxe-Coburg, now King of Bulgaria, though she would probably have married him if there had not been a division of opinion in her family as to the desirability of the alliance. And she sums up the matter in retrospect thus: I do not wish to imply that a princess is forced to accept the first suitor who presents himself. She can choose her future husband within certain limits, but as most princes and kings are very much alike, choice is not a difficult matter after all. Part of our education is to accept without question whatever lies upon the knees of the gods, and although every princess doubtless at some time dreams of an ideal Prince Charming, she rarely meets him, and she usually marries someone quite different from the hero of her girlhood's dreams. There was some talk of marrying Princess Luisa to Dom Pedro, a sort of a cousin, the nephew of the Empress of Brazil, and she tells us what became of that suitor. Poor Dom Pedro. 3 years after our meeting, he went mad, and he is now under restraint in a castle somewhere in Austria. Then Frederick August of Saxony, the present King of Saxony, was presented. Princess Luisa rather liked him, and she married him, and it is noteworthy that, though she ran away from him, impelled by something not herself which made for liberty, she speaks of him in her book without any trace of bitterness. He meant well, one gathers, but was not intelligent enough to understand his wife, who certainly appears to have had many perplexing characteristics, and allowed the well of his natural affection to be poisoned by evil counselors. The details are set forth in my own story, but it is, of course, necessary to remember, when reviewing them, that, though Princess Luisa has told her story, the King of Saxony has not yet told his. One's first impression is of a conflict between natural instincts and artificial conventions. What with their devotion to religion and etiquette, and their inability to distinguish the one thing from the other, the heads of the Saxon house were doubtless difficult companions for an impulsive child of nature. They were stiff and pompous, out of all proportion to their importance, as if they had all swallowed pokers in the cradle. And Princess Luisa came among them like a daughter of Heth, and behaved accordingly, but more so. It would be hopeless to attempt to make separate catalogues of the things which she did and the things which she is only said to have done, but it is clear that she was a romp deficient in veneration for the common objects of worship in royal and Catholic circles. She had a gallery to play to. The common people admired and applauded, and there have, from time to time, been many indications that Princess Luisa's passion for publicity is not less strong and instinctive than her passion for romance. In a Protestant country ruled over by Catholic sovereigns, her obstinate refusal to confess to a Jesuit was naturally a popular demonstration. Protestants everywhere regard Jesuits as the most odious of all ecclesiastics, and confession as the most ridiculous of all modes of religious activity. In advanced democratic circles, too, enthusiasm was naturally aroused by the report that she had chosen a dentist for the companion of her bicycle rides in the Dresden park. It was high time, in view of the Democrats, that the royal family accepted the dentist as a man and a brother. For whereas several civilized countries had contrived to get on without kings, a country without dentists would be intolerable. The royal family, however, blinded by superstitious prejudices, declined to take that view of the matter. Whether friendship for dentists or dislike of Jesuits was the more reprehensible trait in Princess Luisa's character, they either did not know or did not think it worthwhile to say. They summed the matter up by declaring that that was what came of reading Nietzsche. And one hears of an attempt to stem the tide of evil influence by tearing up Princess Luisa's copy of Thus Spake Zarathustra. It was about as effective as the famous attempt to stop an earthquake by taking a pill, and the drama was quickly advanced another stage. The members of the royal family, putting their heads together, came to the conclusion that a woman who preferred bicycling with dentists to confessing her sins to Jesuits must be mad, and must, without delay, be locked up in a lunatic asylum. Whereupon Princess Luisa, having got an inkling of what was about to happen, took to flight. No one will blame her, for no one will believe that her fears were illusory. If there is one circumstance which suggests skepticism of the fact that the percentage of insanity is higher in royal than in other families, It is the fact that members of royal families are unscrupulously ready to accuse each other of insanity and place each other under restraint. The case of Princess Louise of Saxe-Coburg, whom Count Metternich rescued from her prison like a gallant knight of old, is only one of many cases of which Princess Louisa of Tuscany may have bethought herself. Bethinking herself of it, she fled to her father's house at Salzburg, and when her father refused to help her, being one of those stupid old men to whom it is too much trouble to do anything definite, she fled, yet again, to Switzerland, but not alone, and not, it must be added, with the dentist. With her went her brother, the Archduke Leopold. After her came her son's tutor, Monsieur Giron. We will say what needs to be said about Monsieur Giron in a moment, but a word about the Archduke Leopold must come first. Leopold, like Louisa, was at that hour the hero of a romance, though it was not his first romance and was not to be his last. His first love had been Elvira, the daughter of the Spanish pretender, Don Carlos. The proposed marriage had, for some reason, fallen through, and Elvira had consoled herself for her disappointment by eloping with a married man. Now, Leopold was determined to marry Wilhelmina Adamovitz, the daughter of a post office official at Iglau, a minor lady of the theater, with two sisters, one of them on the stage, and the other married to an unimportant employee in one of the state tobacco factories. He had been sent to Egypt to be out of the way of temptation, but he had returned to the temptation as soon as he got back to Austria. For the sake of Wilhelmina Adamovitz, he was prepared not only to take the humble name of Herr Wolfling, but also to sacrifice his allowance of 40,000 crowns a year and his pay as a colonel in the Austrian army. He and she, and Princess Louisa, and Monsieur Giron, a most respectable young man, and the nephew of the professor of public and administrative law at Brussels, were to face the cold world together as a romantic quadruple alliance. And meanwhile, Princess Louisa was being pursued with Olympian thunders from the various homes which she had left. Thunders which took the various forms of denunciation, punishment, and prayer. First of all, there was the official notification of her departure. It said nothing about the peril of the lunatic asylum from which she had escaped, but simply charged her with having ignored all her family ties and proceeded abroad. Then came the court chaplain, who, similarly avoiding all reference to the essential fact, invited the prayers of the congregation for the princess's return to virtuous courses. He must have known that she could only return to those courses at the peril of her liberty, but he may be assumed to have taken the view that it is the function of a court chaplain to pray as he is told. Next followed the intimation that the Crown Prince of Saxony was considering by what means he could obtain the divorce to which, according to the law of his church, he clearly was not entitled, and there also came a telegram from Grand Duke Ferdinand. Nous avons d'autres enfants, nous ne pouvons nous occuper de toi. And finally, Francis Joseph himself took the steps which he considered incumbent on him. The following notice appeared in the Wiener Zeitung on January 28, 1903. We learn that the emperor, in virtue of the powers vested in him as head of the reigning house, has considered it incumbent on him to direct that all the rights, honors, and privileges hitherto appertaining to the consort of the Crown Prince of Saxony, as an Archduchess of Austria by birth, shall be suspended, and that this suspension shall also be maintained in the event of the impending divorce proceedings leading to the results provided for in paragraph 1577 of the Civil Code for the Empire. That the princess shall again receive her original family names, and that she shall accordingly be prohibited henceforth from making use of the title of Imperial Princess, Archduchess, or Royal Princess of Hungary, etc., and from using her ancestral archducal arms with the archducal emblems. Furthermore, she shall no longer have any claim to the title of Imperial and Royal Highness, and all rights connected with such title shall in future be relinquished by her. Unquote. What does it all amount to? On cold analysis, it amounts to this, that if Princess Louisa could have been caught, she would have been placed in an asylum on the assumption that she was mad, and that, as she could not be caught, she was to be punished in contumaciam on the assumption that she was sane. Whether she was actually sane or mad may be a point which it is beyond the province of Francis Joseph's biographer to settle, but he may, at least, permit himself to point out that she cannot have been, at one and the same time, both responsible and irresponsible for her actions, and that the readiness of the heads of both her own and her adopted family to pass from the one assumption to the other to suit their convenience betokens a shiftiness incompatible with the doctrine that kings, princes, and emperors are necessarily upright, honest, or honorable men. We will let that point go, however, and turn back to follow the fortunes of the members of the romantic Quadruple Alliance in Switzerland, where their war against the House of Habsburg was witnessed by innumerable war correspondents from two hemispheres.
This concludes today's reading of the life of the Emperor Francis Joseph, by Francis Gribble. Join us also the day after tomorrow for the subsequent part. Subscribe to Major Intonio's channel. Thank you for listening, and so long.